First things first, Rich, how are you?
Good.
Very good to hear.
Yeah.
So before we get into the record, I'd like to jump back a little bit.
Okay.
Do you remember the first time you really fell in love with a musical artist?
I mean, I remember the first, when I was, maybe 4.
Okay.
My dad would play like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Deja Vu, and Carry On in particular, and I just remember that sound. We had an old like console, record player. It's kind of built in, and my dad would listen to this music, and it's kind of been with us our whole lives. You know what I mean? So it was almost like from the moment we were out of the womb, we were just listening to. He loved Joe Cocker and Crosby, Stills and Nash, Bob Dylan, and Mose Allison to anyone in between. He really, but he had a real strong passion for music, and he was a musician,
right?
So he would play as well. So, but I think like as far as relating to an artist, there was just moments in my life where it would kind of come up. I remember being a teenager. Well, not a teenager, like maybe 12, I guess, and just listening to, Sgt. Pepper, that one of the records that Dad had, and there was a song on there. It was, oh man, what was it? Like Lovely Rita, and there was something about the sound of that just kind of, I had this really strong connection with, and I used to obsess over it.
Okay.
But I still do that. I'll obsess on a song for about a week or two, and then then it's in, and then I can move on, so.
Is it with your own songs now, or still with other people's music?
Obsessing on songs? Yeah, sometimes it can be, but sometimes it's more like to flush it out,
Okay.
So while we were recording this record, there were songs that I would take home, and it was almost like a puzzle, and some of them were done and it was cool, and then other ones I had to, I would listen to it and I was like, I don't like that verse, I got to rewrite the verse, or I have to do this. But with something external, because I didn't write it, it's almost like I'm trying to figure it out, or trying to put that puzzle together. And so that was kind of the Beatles thing was like the first when I was sort of old enough and conscious enough to start creating your own thing. And then, we started, as we got older, I was younger than 12, I would say maybe like 10 or 9. But as we got older, tastes change, and I was way into AC/DC, and I remember my brother would kind of get the records and bring them home, and because he would go out and search for them. And I feel like he would be the guy who would he would go out and scout for music, but whatever I connected with, I would obsess over and learn every instrument, everything that was going on. And so, If You Want Blood, You Got It, that live record, and just being a young boy, seeing that Angus running around and he had the SG stabbed through him, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. And it was fast and aggressive and pretty immediate, But it was also brilliant and bluesy, it had sort of everything. So I was really connected with that. But, the musical sort of arc or path that we took was pretty varied. We started here listening to Prince and, we loved Prince, and Sly and the Family Stone was one of our favorites. Then we kind of went punk rock and got into certain bands like the Dead Kennedys, and, the Black Flag was big back then. But, X, this band out of California, that was one of our favorites, The Clash. And then that kind of took us into this more alternative zone, where for the first time, there was a band from the South that made records that we could relate to, that wasn't like sort of Skinner. We didn't really relate to Skinner, but like R.E.M. There was something about that at the time that spoke to us, and it was very Southern, actually, but it was Southern in a way that we could resonate with. And then that kind of took us back to sort of our past,
Right.
Because R.E.M. were into the Byrds, and they were into Big Star, and they were into, you know, I mean, I saw R.E.M. do an Aerosmith song, you know, but then they would do this sitting in the back of the car, this Big Star song, and then you know, and then there was a whole scene in L.A. and in North Carolina and Athens where they were start playing these things. So, you know, historically throughout that path, there was a lot of stuff that I would attach to, and it varied greatly, you know.
And with most of the names you mentioned now, they've been great songwriters. So
Yeah.
When did songwriting become important for you?
Right away, you know, like I didn't start playing guitar till I was 15, and which was late, I think. You know, some people start. I think Marc Ford started when he was like 7. Okay. You know, and so. And I started off, and you know, we weren't very good. No one starts off really good, actually. But first thing we did was write songs. You know, we weren't really good enough to cover songs. Okay. So it's just like, well, you know, let's just go down this road and write these songs, and that's really where it came from. You know.
And I believe the She Talks to Angels, is that one of the first ones you wrote?
For the record, I mean, I was 17.
Okay.
But yeah, 17. But that was what we had written for. We started writing for Shake Your Moneymaker at that time, and so that's where it came from.
What did you get out of songwriting, especially that early on?
It's almost like that puzzle, you know what I mean? Like just putting together pieces. You know, music meant so much to me as a kid, and there was a feeling that was attached to every song that we liked and that we could relate to, you know, and so. If I could write a song like that someone could relate to, or even I could relate to, one of my own things, you know, that was really what it was. It was just, you know, this sort of form of creation that appealed to me and that I felt a strong connection with.
And I believe these days you also paint, so is that creative outlet, has that always been there, that you needed certain avenues? Yeah,
I mean, sometimes, you know, there was, like, my dad and my brother were big talkers. They never stopped talking. And my mom, you know, everyone, and so there was all these different elements. And so I was always a little more quiet and introspective, and so being able to have an outlet to communicate things that I couldn't necessarily communicate with words was important, you know. And it was something I was just automatically kind of drawn to when I was a kid.
And then you mentioned all these names that inspired you, and then all of a sudden, first album, great success.
Yeah.
And you kind of catapulted into that world. What was that like, especially being still young and kind of finding your own way?
I mean, you know, it's like riding a wave, you know. You just kind of, doesn't make any sense, you know what I mean? Like, I remember when we were kids, I mean, I was 15 years old, and like, we loved R.E.M. I mean, it was like, that was our favorite, you know, it was like, that was it. And we played in Athens, Georgia, and they were all living up there. And a friend of ours, I guess she maybe knew those guys. We were playing in this sort of shitty club. It was like, maybe it was a restaurant, I don't even know, but we were doing sound check, and Pete Buck walked in, and he came to see us. And, you know, it was just like, you know, and back then, they'd probably only sold about 40,000 records. No one knew who were, but to us, it was like, could have been Keith Richards, you know what I mean? It was like, and you know, he was like, yeah, that was good. It was all right, you know. But we were just totally trying to rip off R.E.M. I mean, he knew what was going on, but it was really cool. But it was, I was like, why is this dude in here watching us? I mean, it was interesting, you know what I mean? But I've had that a bunch, you know.
Sure.
At the end of Shake Your Moneymaker, we're opening for AC/DC, and I found out later that Malcolm loved our band and wanted us on the tour, and we would sit there and watch those guys, and I'm like, and by then I was 21, you know, I was still young, and I was like, I mean, I could draw a direct correlation, you know, without much of a stretch, to like being that kid loving AC/DC, and all of a sudden, you know, they came to see us at the Paradiso.
Right.
You know, on one of the days off, we were touring with Monsters of Rock, and we played the Paradiso, and Malcolm and Angus came down, and Brian, and we're just like, the fuck is this? You know what I mean? Like, it was amazing. And so it was kind of surreal, but there's been a lot of those moments. So like when we open for the Stones, I mean, you know, Chris and I were allowed to stand behind Keith's amps, and they're like, no one stands back here, but you guys can stand back here. So we were standing behind Keith's amps every night, and you know, it's one of the few times Chris and I got along, you know, because we were happy about, you know, and Charlie's sitting right there, and he's just looking over at us, and you know, all around the drums are Keith, Mick, and Ronnie Wood, and Charlie, and you know, it's amazing, and it's far out, and we were like, fuck, you know.